Alrighty. Week 6, Thursday. So I mentioned I'd be trading off on days that we start vocabulary. So this time, the B-Day folks are starting it in class, and A-Day folks, you're starting it online. So I'm going to talk about vocabulary first, and it'll kind of work the same way that it did last time, except obviously different groups are doing different things. B-Day group will be presenting pictures on Friday. And then when A-Day folks come to class on Monday, you'll have lots of fun pictures, and we'll do our vocabulary game. And then our quiz is on Tuesday. So just be a little bit of a trade-off, but you get a whole weekend to study. All right, vocab 2. So your first word for vocabulary list number 2 is capitulate. So to capitulate is to surrender, to give in, to give up, to wave the white flag, to say, I'm done, I lose. So some variety of surrender. It doesn't have to be in a military context, just any sort of I give up kind of moment. The second one, limpid. So the word limpid means clear, but it means like both types of clear. So it can be limpid as in like I can see through that clear, but it can also be limpid as in I can understand that clear. So it can be used in either context, just like the word clear. The third one, destitute. Someone who is destitute is very, very poor. They've fallen upon hard times, lived in a box on the side of the road. They are victims of abject poverty. Now, the fourth one, just note that this one is a noun. An accord is an agreement. It is not to agree, but it is the agreement itself. So you would make an accord with someone by, shaking hands or signing a contract or whatever to symbolize your agreement. The fifth one, bliss. Again, note that this is a noun. It is happiness, not happy. You cannot say she is such a bliss person because you wouldn't say she is such a happiness person. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So just note that it is describing the feeling of happiness, not the adjective happy. The sixth one, berserk, describes someone who's crazed. They're out of their little mind. They have lost it, been pushed to the brink, and have absolutely no control. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. The seventh one, a verb, broach, is to mention something. Now, some people have asked me about the noun form of this, like the jewelry piece. Totally unrelated. So when it is in verb form, to broach a topic is to mention the topic, to bring it up in the course of conversation. The eighth one, procure, I feel like I use this word all the time. It's a very useful one, and it means to obtain or to get something. So it's just a much classier way to say, we need to procure some presents for Christmas. So it's much better than get, The ninth one, rectify. I like this one as well. To rectify something is to correct or to fix. So if I have made a grading mistake, then I must rectify my error and give the student the appropriate grade. And then the 10th one, masticate. To masticate is to chew. So you could masticate your food, you could masticate gum, but some variety of chewing must be going on. Some people at Forbush like to masticate some chewing tobacco. So those are your 10 words. Hopefully you like them, and we will talk more about them later. Okay, so we are going to do a bit of reading today. A couple things to share with you before we start reading. First, your TV statistics for today have to do with violence. And if you paid any attention during the last reading section, you will understand why I am approaching the topic of violence. So, the number of murders seen on TV by the time an average child finishes elementary school, 8,000. The number of violent acts seen on TV by the age of 18, 150,000. And the percentage of Americans who believe that TV violence helps precipitate real-life mayhem, 79. So it's incredible to me that most people believe that viewing violence, even if it is in a digital capacity, makes real life violence more likely to happen. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of action about that, I mean, aside from maybe like ratings on movies and things like that. But yeah, that doesn't seem to be something that our culture seems interested in addressing. The other question that I always ask, and I haven't found any statistics on this, but if this many people believe that TV violence helps precipitate real life mayhem, I would be fascinated to know how many people believe that video game violence helps precipitate real life mayhem. A lot of people, a lot of students have made the argument to me that, well, it's one thing if you're just watching it, it's another thing if you are the one carrying out violent acts. I think that could influence an unstable person, over the edge or whatever. So, anyways, there's how there's how mass media might be influencing our violent society. Okay, the other thing I wanted to discuss with you has to do with the section that you read, and got some historical information about Mr. Ridley. Again, this name should ring a bell if you paid attention during the section. So the old woman, before she, set herself on fire, said that quote about "Play the man, Master Ridley, for we shall this day in England light such a candle as shall never be put out." I'm loosely paraphrasing there. So that quote, and Beatty did explain some of the significance to us, but that quote is especially significant given what the woman is trying to do. That was not just a random literary quote. It was meant to make an allusion to these three men, the Oxford Martyrs. So Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer were all what's the word I'm looking for? Residents of the British capital back in 1555, and they were executed as part of some religious discrimination, I guess you'd call it. So, lots of words here, but I'm going to kind of sum up. You can feel free to pause and read all of the words if you're interested. But essentially, the Oxford Martyrs kind of starts with King Henry VIII. I'm sure you're probably familiar with King Henry VIII. He was the one who chopped all his wives' heads off. So when King Henry VIII died, he left 3 heirs. He tried his darndest to have lots and lots of sons, but, it kept not working out. He kept chopping wives' heads off. Ironically enough, if you know anything about genetics and babies and things of that nature, the individual in a coupling who determines whether a baby is male or female is actually the father. So Henry VIII was cutting off all these poor women's heads when really the reason he wasn't having male kids was because of, him. But go figure. Anyways, so he had one dude, Edward. Edward was a lovely child, very Protestant and everything, but he was very sickly and he didn't live very long. So when Edward died, the throne passed to his sister Mary, also known as Bloody Mary. Yes, that is where the alcoholic drink gets its name. So Mary was Roman Catholic. Her mother had been Roman Catholic. She was Spanish. And she decided that the entire country was going to convert to Roman Catholicism. So she decided that when she instituted this new religion around the country, and, of course, everyone was going to go along with it, that if there was anyone who didn't agree with her, any heretics, then they would burn. See where this is going, right? So she was very, very unpopular. Eventually, she was, ousted from the throne, and Elizabeth I took over. But while Mary was in power, she burned a number of lovely humans. So one of them was Hugh Latimer. He was the Bishop of Worcester in the time of King Henry. but he resigned in protest against the king's refusal to allow Protestant reforms. So he was very devoutly Protestant. So, of course, when Mary came to the throne, he was arrested and burned with his friend Nicholas Ridley. He is the one who spoke the quote that this old woman said just before she burned herself. So, Hugh Latimer's buddy, Nicholas Ridley, was also a devout Protestant. This is a wood etching of their execution. It was not uncommon for large crowds to gather to observe the burnings, see the death, and presumably be scared enough that they wouldn't, try the same thing. The other individual who was burned the following year, Thomas Cranmer, is also considered one of the Oxford martyrs because of how hardcore he was when he went down. So Thomas Cranmer struggled for a little bit longer than Latimer and Ridley. He truly believed that it was the duty of every Christian to obey the monarch. He believed in divine right, and he struggled heartily with choosing between his divinely appointed monarch and his religious beliefs. So he tried real hard to convert to Catholicism. He said 5 times he wrote a letter of submission to the Pope and to the Roman Catholic doctrines, and 4 times he tore it up. In the end, he did submit it, but then Mary didn't buy it. So she decided to burn him anyways. And he said, you know what? That's fair, because I didn't really mean it. And yeah, I deserve this. I deserve to be burned as a Protestant, because I have sinned in that I signed with my hand what I did not believe with my heart. When the flames are lit, this hand shall be the first to burn. So when they lit the fire around his feet, he leaned forward, held his right hand in the fire until it was charred to a stump. Aside from this, he did not speak or move, except that once he raised his left hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Dude was hardcore. So here's an etching of Thomas Cranmer holding his hand in the fire, completely devoted to his religion once again after his moral struggle, his moral quandary. So when this woman speaks this quote and then proceeds to, light herself and her house on fire, she is making an allusion to these men. She is comparing her belief system, which obviously includes, knowledge and books and freedom and stuff like that, to the religious devotion of these men, and saying, I would rather die than live in a world without these elements. So, the effect that she has on Montag is definitely going to be profound. You don't just watch someone burn themselves alive and shake it off and go about your day, especially if you were already in a position where you were having some doubts. So even though Montag may not know the history of these men, he recognizes the power of martyrdom and the power of self-sacrifice. And that is going to make a bit of a difference. So, oh wait, no, here. Okay, so this was the last thing that you read, theoretically. And some people had a little trouble with number 7. What did Montag do when he got home? So, yes, he entered the room and, Mildred's rambling on about whatever, and he collapses in his bed. But when Mildred comes over to feel his cheek, he said that he knew when she pulled her hand away from his face, it was wet. So the small sounds that are being described here, Montag is crying. He's sobbing, for this woman who has died in front of him. He's crying because of what he's seen. So he is definitely impacted by her sacrifice and her death. Okay. Let's get a bit farther and see what kind of inner demons Montag is wrestling with. Late in the night, he looked over at Mildred. She was awake. There was a tiny dance of melody in the air. Her seashell was tamped in her ear again, and she was listening to far people in far places, her eyes wide and staring at the fathoms of blackness above her in the ceiling. Wasn't there an old joke about the wife who talked so much on the telephone that her desperate husband ran out to the nearest store and telephoned her to ask what was for dinner? Well, then, why didn't he buy himself an audio seashell broadcasting station and talk to his wife late at night, murmur, whisper, shout, scream, yell? But what would he whisper? What would he yell? What could he say? And suddenly she was so strange she couldn't believe he knew her at all. He was in someone else's house, like those other jokes people told of the gentleman, drunk, coming home late at night, unlocking the wrong door, entering a wrong room, and betting with a stranger, and getting up early and going to work, and neither of them the wiser. "Millie," he whispered. "What?" "I didn't mean to startle you. What I want to know is, well, when did we meet? And where?" "When did we meet for what?" she asked. "I mean, originally." He knew she must be frowning in the dark. He clarified it. "The first time we ever met. Where was it? And when?" "Why, it was at—" She stopped. "I don't know," she said. He was cold. "Can she remember?" "It's been so long." "Only 10 years, that's all. Only 10. Don't get excited. I'm trying to think." She laughed, an odd little laugh that went up and up. "Funny. How funny not to remember where or when you met your husband or wife." He lay massaging his eyes, his brow and the back of his neck slowly. He held both hands over his eyes and applied a steady pressure there, as if to crush memory into place. It was suddenly more important than any other thing in a lifetime that he knew where he had met Mildred. It doesn't matter. She was up in the bathroom now, and he heard the water running and the swallowing sound she made. "No, I guess not," he said. He tried to count how many times she swallowed, and he thought of the visit from the two zinc oxide-faced men with their cigarettes in their straight-lined mouths, and the electronic-eyed snake winding down into the layer upon layer of night and stone and stagnant spring water, and he wanted to call out to her, "How many have you taken tonight? The capsules. How many will you take later and not know?" And so on every hour. Or maybe not tonight, tomorrow night, and me not sleeping tonight or tomorrow night or any night for a long while, not that this has started. And he thought of her lying on the bed with the two technicians standing straight over her, not bent with concern, but only standing straight, arms folded. And he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry. For it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image. And it was suddenly so very wrong that he had begun to cry, not at death, but at the thought of not crying at death. A silly empty man near a silly empty woman, while the hungry snake made her still more empty. How do you get so empty? He wondered. Who takes it out of you? And that awful flower the other day, the dandelion, it had summed up everything, hadn't it? What a shame. You're not in love with anyone. And why not? Well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when you came down to it? Literally not just one wall, but so far 3. And expensive, too. And the uncles, the aunts, the cousins, the nieces, the nephews that lived in those walls, the gibbering pack of tree apes that said nothing, 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 and said it loud, loud, loud. He had taken to calling them relatives from the very first. How's Uncle Louis today? Who? And Aunt Maud? The most significant memory he had of Mildred, really, was of a little girl in a forest without trees. How odd. Or rather, a little girl lost on a plateau where there used to be trees. You could feel the memory of their shapes all about. Sitting in the center of the living room. The living room. What a good job of labeling that was now. No matter when he came in, the walls were always talking to Mildred. Something must be done. Yes, something must be done. Well, let's not stand and talk. Let's do it. I'm so mad I could spit. What was it all about? Mildred couldn't say. Who was mad at whom? Mildred didn't quite know. What were they going to do? Well, said Mildred, wait around and see. He had waited around to see. A great thunderstorm of sound gushed from the walls. Music bombarded him at such an immense volume that his bones were almost shaken from their tendons. He felt his jaw vibrate, his eyes wobble in his head. He was a victim of concussion. When it was all over, he felt like a man who had been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge, and spat out over a waterfall that fell and fell into emptiness and never quite touched bottom. Never quite, no, not quite touched bottom. And you fell so fast, you didn't touch the sides either. Never quite touched anything. The thunder faded. The music died. There, said Mildred. And it was indeed remarkable. Something had happened, even though the people in the walls of the room had barely moved, and Nothing had really been settled. You had the impression that someone had turned on a washing machine or sucked you up in a gigantic vacuum. You drowned in music and pure cacophony. He came out of the room sweating and on the point of collapse. Behind him, Mildred sat in her chair, and the voices went on again. Well, everything will be all right now, said an aunt. Oh, don't be too sure, said a cousin. Now don't get angry. Who's angry? You are. You're mad. Why should I be mad? Because. That's all very well, cried Montag. But what are they mad about? Who are these people? Who's that man and who's that woman? Are they husband and wife? Are they divorced? Engaged? What? Good God, nothing's connected up. They, said Mildred. Well, they had this fight, you see. They certainly fight a lot. You should listen. I think they're married. Yes, they're married. Why? And if it was not the 3 walls, soon to be 4 walls, and the dream complete, then it was the open car, and Mildred driving 100 miles an hour across town, he shouting at her and she shouting back, and both trying to hear what was said, but hearing only the scream of the car. At least keep it down to the minimum, he yelled. What? She cried. Keep it down to 55, the minimum, he shouted. The what? She shrieked. Speed, he shouted, and she pushed it up to 105 miles an hour and tore the breath from his mouth. When they stepped out of the car, she had the seashells stuffed in her ears. Silence, only the wind blowing softly. Mildred? He stirred in bed. He reached over and pulled one of the tiny musical insects out of her ear. Mildred? Mildred? Yes. Her voice was faint. He felt he was one of the creatures electronically inserted between the slots of the phonocolor walls, speaking, but the speech not piercing the crystal barrier. He could only pantomime, hoping she would turn his way and see him. They could not touch through the glass. Mildred, do you know that girl I was telling you about? What girl? She was almost asleep. The girl next door. What girl next door? Oh, you know, the high school girl. Clarice, her name is. Oh, yes, said his wife. I haven't seen her for a few days. 4 days, to be exact. Have you seen her? No. I've meant to talk to you about her. Strange. Oh, I know the one you mean. I thought you would. Her, said Mildred in the dark room. What about her? Asked Montag. I meant to tell you. Forgot. Tell me now. What is it? I think she's gone. Gone? Whole family moved out somewhere, but she's gone for good. I think she's dead. We couldn't be talking about the same girl. No, the same girl. McClellan, run over by a car 4 days ago. I'm not sure, but I think she's dead. The family moved out anyway. I don't know, but I think she's dead. You're not sure of it? No, not sure. Pretty sure. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Forgot. 4 days ago? I forgot all about it. 4 days ago, he said quietly, lying there. They lay there in the dark room, not moving, either of them. Good night, she said. He heard a faint rustle. Her hands moved. The electric thimble moved like a praying mantis on the pillow, touched by her hand. Now it was in her ear again, humming. He listened, and his wife was singing under her breath. Outside the house, a shadow moved. An autumn wind rose up and faded away, but there was something else in the silence that he heard. It was like a breath exhaled upon the window. It was like a faint drift of greenish luminescent smoke, the motion of a single huge October leaf blowing across the lawn and away. The hound, he thought. It's out there tonight. It's out there now. If I opened the window. He did not open the window. Okay. Pause there. So this all takes place the night of the fire, the night of the woman burning herself. There's a lot of kind of flashbacks and memories and thoughts that Montag is having here. Physically, not much is happening. Montag and Mildred laying in bed. That's about all that's going on. But in Montag's mind, he's having this like thought explosion going on. Really reflecting and becoming introspective about his life and the way that it is. He's fully realizing the absolute disconnect between him and his wife. He realizes that the dandelion was right. The reason he got so mad is it was totally accurate. He and his wife are in fact so disconnected that neither of them can remember how they first met. You would assume someone significant enough to be, your spouse for theoretically the rest of your life. You'd remember the first moment that you set eyes upon them, but neither of them can remember it. Nothing. Total blank. Mildred doesn't seem to care. Montag is very distressed. Let's see, what else do we talk about? So he talks about the television screens a lot, the parlor walls, refers to them as Mildred's family, because of course, he doesn't seem to be Mildred's family. She has TV relatives who she seems to be much closer to. The TV shows seem to be, kind of vapid conversation, crazy loud music. It doesn't seem like these are high quality shows that Mildred is watching here. Maybe that's Mildred's fault. Maybe there just isn't anything high quality out there. We can theorize. Then the bomb, Clarice. So Montag knew that, something happened. We definitely didn't think Mildred would be the one to remember. Mildred seems to believe she's dead. Hit by a car. We do know people in this society drive very fast. It's a reasonable theory. We also know Mildred is super spacey and doesn't really pay attention to real life as much as she pays attention to her television. So we could hope that maybe she just watched a TV show where someone got hit by a car and that's what she's thinking of. But if she is accurate, then Clarice is no more. She's gone. Bye-bye, Clarice. So we'll find that out later. Once again, I totally forgot to tell you what page we were stopping on. I'll get it eventually. The next section that I want to read starts with Captain Beatty. Yes. So we're going to stop here today when Captain Beatty arrives at Montag's house. So that'll be coming up soon. So we'll get the rest of this conversation with Montag and Mildred, the conversation that happens the morning after the fire. But we will save Captain Beatty's interview for tomorrow's reading. Okay, so picking up where we left off. Okay, so the morning after the fire. He had chills and fever in the morning. "You can't be sick," said Mildred. He closed his eyes over the hotness. "Yes." "But you were all right last night." "No, I wasn't all right." He heard the relatives shouting in the parlor. Mildred stood over his bed, curiously. He felt her there. He saw her, without opening his eyes, her hair burnt by chemicals to a brittle straw, her eyes with a kind of cataract unseen but suspect far behind the pupils, the reddened, pouting lips, the body as thin as a praying mantis from dieting, and her flesh like white bacon. He could remember her no other way. "Will you bring me aspirin and water?" "You've got to get up," she said. "It's noon. You slept 5 hours later than usual." "Will you turn the parlor off?" he asked. "That's my family." "Will you turn it off for a sick man?" "I'll turn it down." She went out of the room and did nothing to the parlor and came back. "Is that better?" "Thanks." "That's my favorite program," she said. "What about the aspirin?" "You've never been sick before." She went away again. "Well, I'm sick now. I'm not going to work tonight. Call Beatty for me." "You acted funny last night." She returned, humming. "Where's the aspirin?" He glanced at the water glass she handed him. "Oh." She walked to the bathroom again. "Did something happen?" "Fire is all." "I had a nice evening," she said in the bathroom. "What doing?" "The parlor." "What was on?" "Programs." "What programs?" "Some of the best ever." "Who?" "Oh, the bunch." "Yes, the bunch, the bunch, the bunch." He pressed at the pain in his eyes, and suddenly the odor of kerosene made him vomit. Mildred came in, humming. She was surprised. "Why'd you do that?" He looked with dismay at the floor. "We burned an old woman with her books." "It's a good thing the rug's washable." She fetched a mop and worked on it. "I went to Helen's last night." "Couldn't you get the shows in your own parlor?" "Sure, but it's nice visiting." She went out into the parlor. He heard her singing. "Mildred?" he called. She returned, singing, snapping her fingers softly. "Aren't you going to ask me about last night?" he said. "What about it?" We burned 1,000 books. We burned a woman. Well, the parlor was exploding with sound. We burned copies of Dante and Swift and Marcus Aurelius. Wasn't he a European? Something like that. Wasn't he a radical? I never read him. He was a radical. Mildred fiddled with the telephone. You don't expect me to call Captain Beatty, do you? You must. Don't shout. I wasn't shouting. He was up in bed suddenly, enraged and flushed, shaking. The parlor roared in the hot air. I can't call him. I can't tell him I'm sick. Why? Because you're afraid, he thought. A child feigning illness, afraid to call because after a moment's discussion the conversation would run so. Yes, Captain, I feel better already. I'll be in at 10 o'clock tonight. You're not sick, said Mildred. Montag fell back in bed. He reached under his pillow. The hidden book was still there. Mildred, how would it be if, well, maybe I quit my job a while? You want to give up everything after all these years of working because one night some woman in her books? You should have seen her, Millie. She's nothing to me. She shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She should have thought of that. I hate her. She's got you going. Next thing you know, we'll be out. No house, no job, nothing. You weren't there. You didn't see, he said. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing. She was simple-minded. She was as rational as you and I, more so perhaps, and we burned her. That's water under the bridge. No, not water, fire. You ever seen a burned house? It smolders for days. Well, this fire will last me the rest of my life. God, I've been trying to put it out in my mind all night. I'm crazy with trying. You should have thought of that before becoming a fireman. Thought? He said. Was I given a choice? My grandfather and father were firemen. In my sleep, I ran after them. The parlor was playing a dance tune. This is the day you go on the early shift, said Mildred. You should have gone 2 hours ago. I just noticed. It's not just the woman that died, said Montag. Last night, I thought about all the kerosene I've used in the past 10 years, and I thought about books. And for the first time, I realized that a man was behind each one of the books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take a long time to put them down on paper. And I'd never even thought that thought before. He got out of bed. It took some man a lifetime, maybe, to put some of his thoughts down, looking around at the world and life. And then I came along in 2 minutes, and boom, it's all over. Let me alone, said Mildred. I didn't do anything. Let you alone? That's all very well, but how can I leave myself alone? We need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered about something important, about something real? And then he shut up, for he remembered last week and the 2 white stones staring up at the ceiling, and the pump snake with the probing eye, and the 2 soap-faced men with the cigarettes moving in their mouths when they talked. But that was another Mildred. That was a Mildred so deep inside this one and so bothered, really bothered, that the 2 women had never met. He turned away. Mildred said, Well, now you've done it. Out front of the house. Look who's here. I don't care. There's a Phoenix car just driven up and a man in a black suit with an orange snake stitched on his arm coming up the front walk. Captain Beatty? He said. Captain Beatty. Okay, so that's where I want to stop. So we'll get to see what happens with Captain Beatty tomorrow. You know you're in trouble when your boss shows up at your house. It's going to be an interesting conversation for sure. But I just wanted to examine some of Montag's thoughts here. He's really taken off. Clarice has made an incredible impact on him, and this woman, being burned, that was the spark that has set a fire loose inside Montag, and he just can't let it go. Okay, so in the morning, Montag isn't feeling well. Mildred seems in a very strange kind of denial about his illness. Not quite sure why she is so perturbed about it, but doesn't seem to be... what's the word looking for? She doesn't seem to find him credible. Now, we get a really fascinating physical description of Mildred in this part. Her hair burnt by chemicals to a brittle straw, her eyes with a kind of cataract unseen but suspect far behind the pupils, the reddened, pouting lips, the body as thin as a praying mantis from dieting, and her flesh like white bacon. Ugh. So I'm just imagining, the white part of bacon and someone's flesh looking totally like that and their hair all like bleached and burnt and stuff and it's just is gross. So Mildred is a piece of work for sure. We again see the disconnect in their relationship. She absolutely refuses to even turn down her TV program for Montag's comfort. Then, let's see, the really wonderful line here. Montag vomits on the floor. Most people would interpret that as a sign of illness. Most people would be concerned. Mildred comes in and says, "Why'd you do that?" What do you think? You think he did it on purpose? He's traumatized and he's ill and he's not okay. Have a little empathy, woman. Anyways, it's a good thing the rag's washable. Just a absolute piece of work. Good old Mildred. So Montag is trying to kind of get through to Mildred and make her understand his experience. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone and just like partway in the conversation, you realize, wow, the amount of conversation we'd have to get you to the intellectual level to understand what I'm talking about would take years. I'm sure Montag at some point in this conversation feels that feeling. Mildred is so vapid, so shallow, so checked out. She's just not able to even grasp the beginnings of what he's talking about here. We still have the hidden book under Montag's pillow. That should be fun when his boss comes in. And then one of my favorite lines in this book, when Montag starts to really realize some things about life, he says, "We need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while." And I thought about that a lot this summer, as people were talking about these very serious issues, the health crisis going on in our country, the economic crisis that is resulting from the health crisis, the social crisis that's going on, and the protests for racial and social justice. A lot of people, especially on good old social media, definitely wanted to kind of check out. They wanted to keep posting their cute pictures of, fuzzy animals and happy families and activities and whatever. And they just didn't want to deal with any of the problems going on. And, some of them, to be fair, I'm sure were stressed out enough about things that, they just kind of couldn't deal with it. But Montag argues, and I think this is important for growth. Every once in a while, we need to be really bothered about something. We need to find an issue that is important enough and critical enough and crucial enough that we say, something needs to be done about that, and I'm going to do something about it. And we need to become involved and invested in something, whatever that issue is. So for Montag, his society is a mess, and he's starting to realize it. And he's starting to think to himself, what can I do? I don't want to be a part of the system that, can lead to people being burned alive. But what do I do? So he's in a bit of a pickle. So we'll see if Captain Beatty can resolve this issue for him, or will it only get worse? So that's where I leave you.